My name is Zach Newell, and I'm discussing my paper on creative pedagogy and information literacy in higher education. This paper explores the need for information literacy practitioners to better understand these changes and practices in higher education as an opportunity to enact more holistically creative pedagogical practices. Creative pedagogy is not easily quantified or understood as a term that applies to the teaching of information literacy. The study informing this paper employs constructivist grounded theory research as a method with the aim of abstract understanding of studied life and view the analyses as located in time, place, and the situation of inquiry. To explore the relationship between creative pedagogy and information literacy, this study garners feedback through interviews with library instructors about the ways in which creative pedagogy informs their practice. Interviews seek to uncover hidden actions and intentions or exposing policies and practices and their implications using three main points. First, since creative pedagogy is a loose set of guidelines, frameworks, and theories, there is very little language in the library classroom that formally acknowledges creative practice as informed by the influence of creative pedagogy. Creativity has not yet been understood as a term that applies to the teaching of information literacy. Two, in order to develop an understanding of the potential role of creative pedagogy, this study garners feedback from library instructors to explore the ways in which creative pedagogy informs their practice and manifests in their instruction. Acknowledging the lack of an existing theory, set of standards, or a precise vocabulary to underpin the research, the study will implement grounded theory research using a phenomenological approach with the aim of uncovering the varied dimensions of the concepts around creative pedagogy to characterize information literacy and its teaching moving forward. The study will employ in-depth interviews with and situational observations of instruction librarians in order to examine whether and how instruction librarians integrate creativity in their teaching. And third point, ultimately the research findings will be synthesized into a theory to better account for what explains the application of creative pedagogy in the teaching of information literacy. In this paper, the theory begins to take shape. Elena Koff, publisher of the first work on creative pedagogy in the Bulletin of Higher Education, defined the concept of creative pedagogy as an approach to creative teaching to promote creative learning. Additionally, Elena Koff states that creative pedagogy teaches how to learn creatively and become creators of themselves and creators of their future. Kremen and Chappell in 2019 conduct a systematic review of the literature referencing creative pedagogies from 1990 to 2018. The systematic review underscores 7 characteristics of creative pedagogy, including generating and exploring ideas, encouraging autonomy and agency, playfulness, problem solving, risk-taking, co-constructing and collaborating, and teacher creativity. In the paper, definitions are not offered as the terms are framed differently in each of the 35 papers or studies analyzed. The authors point to the nuanced discussion of the various ways in which the characteristics are documented. In each study, outlining the challenges in defining creative pedagogy. The nature of creative pedagogy is evidenced, but not defined. As part of the review of the literature, there are 4 main areas of investigation. Creativity and information in innovation in higher education are becoming increasingly important for the development of the 21st century knowledge society. They contribute to economic prosperity as well as to social and individual well-being and are essential factors for a more competitive and dynamic society. Creativity posited as an individual skill that is a necessary precondition for the development of nationwide innovation, invention, and entrepreneurship. The call for its improvement in future generations through the education system seems to be a logical consequence. Another, constructivist pedagogy, is informed by Vygotsky as acknowledged for laying the foundation of sociocultural theoretical influence and its application on information literacy research. The understanding is that for Vygotsky, learning is embedded within the social events and occurs as a learner interacts with other people, objects, events, and in the environment. Based on sociocultural theories with social interaction, students talk to learn, and the effective and subjective aspects of learning are brought into play as students must articulate their viewpoints and listen to the views of other group members. The goal, which seems to be rarely realized, is to develop a capacity for critical, conceptual, and reflective thinking. This requires information literacy practitioners to extend the ideas of social constructivist theory into a more holistic understanding of creative pedagogical principles. Inquiry-based education is generally seen as supportive of the natural inclination of most students, as fostering an innate desire to both question and create. Inquiry-based learning is predicated on independent thought, also known as critical thinking, a complex skill that requires instructional guidance, practice, and ongoing feedback. This begins with the teacher librarian modeling the steps of inquiry to students, then gradually transferring the leadership role to the student. The student, through questioning, can formulate more complex questions. The indication is that inquiry through a questioning pedagogy gets at creative pedagogical principles, as it is exploring the critical thinking of a problem-solving processes encompassed in creative pedagogical aspects. And finally, critical literacy is outlined through 3 points. Critical literacy assumes that teaching of literacy is never neutral, but always embraces a particular ideology or perspective. Critical literacy fosters multiple ways of looking at an issue and facilitates a personal and engaged relationship between the student and the information. Reflective pedagogy teaches students about personally meaningful information and non-analytic information processes, means first and foremost to create a space where inner life can be nurtured, where creativity can emerge, where students can love the questions. And it is in these questions as a reflective and creative foundation that students and librarians can see the world differently, explore alternatives and possibilities as it allows for exploration, play, and divergent thinking. The basis of questioning is predicated on a healthy skepticism. The current study focuses on library instructors' conceptualizations and applications of creative pedagogy as revealed through interviews. And pursuing a constructivist grounded research study that recognizes a lack of a cohesive theory or definition for creative pedagogical practice in the information literacy classroom, this study discovers reality that arises from the interactive process and is framed by a series of questions. How is creative pedagogy and information literacy understood and utilized? What does the application of creative pedagogy and information literacy mean for academic libraries? And what explains the application of creative pedagogy in the teaching of information literacy? The population of this study is academic libraries at both the undergraduate and graduate level. The study focuses on the academic librarians teaching information literacy and who use or may be using creative pedagogy. The sample size for findings for this paper is 15 participants. The initial set of interviews, or phase 1, focuses on general information literacy practitioners, those who do not necessarily self-identify as creative practitioners. The aim of the research is to identify creative pedagogical practices that may already be part of standard library instruction. Those instructors who employ creative pedagogical practice but are not aware that it is creative pedagogy is the focus of this study. After interviewing the initial 15 librarians, the researcher continues to elaborate and refine theoretical categories and continues soliciting participants from specific and established teaching and learning communities, and to consider them representative of and authorities in specific perspectives and practices associated with more creative learning communities. Based on their expert responses, those who employ creative practice will establish a baseline for components of creative pedagogy in action. This paper reflects research in progress and summarizes phase 1 findings. The categories below that will be discussed represent the critical consciousness phase of the interviews and are created as a result of the questions asked by the researcher. The analysis is the result of coding the data, memo writing, and comparative analysis. The themes dictated by the initial questions are analyzed and explicated to adjust interview questions moving forward, especially when interviewing the creative information literacy experts. Those interviews, as the first component, challenges in teaching information literacy, those interviewed cite little formal background in teaching. Many of those librarians made up for the deficit by training themselves, mostly on the job and in the classroom. This means that they have had to read up on teaching practices. In many cases, librarians learned to develop their teaching skills in the classroom where they had a chance to put their self-taught learning into practice. Among the 15 librarians interviewed as part of the initial phase of the study, almost all indicated that they see their role in the information literacy classroom as one of a guide. Here, guide is defined as supportive or complementary. to another's faculty class. To clarify this role, it means that the information literacy librarian is not seen as central to the learning of the students, but supportive of a particular task. For example, research development in support of another discipline-specific class. Additionally, this means that librarians feel they are teaching certain techniques and tools rather than addressing underlying systems for sustainable thinking, albeit critical means, for thinking about their research. This then is understood that librarians lack the flexibility to develop their own curriculum for each class, as they are not viewed as a primary partner in the classroom. The trouble, as expressed through the interviews, is that there is little leeway to really develop teaching skills without autonomy in the classroom or to enhance the class in a meaningful way. This is discussed during the interviews primarily as the ability to try new things in the classroom, as librarians are seen as task-oriented. For engaging or awe-inspiring, one of the interview questions asked librarians to think about a great class that they consider to be awe-inspiring. The question is designed to get interview participants to reflect on how they might define a great or engaging class. Many of the terms used to describe the class include words like engaging, passionate, exciting, knowledgeable, referring to mastery of knowledge by the person teaching a class. There's very little differentiation between the type of class. So for example, lecture as opposed to active learning. Many of the classes were thought to be inspirational despite the form of delivery. There was almost universal agreement that passion, also referred to as excitement, and engagement were what made the class or lecture so memorable and awe-inspiring. When recalling the class, the librarians interviewed felt that they wanted to implement the same type of engagement and passion in their own class. However, they felt that implementing similar delivery was challenging without control of their own class, and in many cases, without the pedagogical training to do so. As stated above, it is challenging when information literacy classes are connected to another faculty member's course, meaning that certain tools and outcomes for research are drivers for the class. The data of interest that gets to the research is a series of 3 questions asked that prompt interviewees to think about part of their information literacy instruction that might be considered creative. The first is a question about implementing critical and reflective practice in the classroom. Importantly, despite thinking that librarians have little control over the pedagogical delivery in the class, all librarians interviewed acknowledged that they are doing work in the realm of critical reflective teaching. Much of the work being done in the information literacy classroom, while tools and skills-based, teaching to database searching, for example, involves a degree of practical-based pedagogy. The critical component then involves a real-world component in which librarians will conduct exercises examining an approach to something like buying a car or buying clothes. The exercise takes students out of the traditions of scholarly research and applies similar decision-making strategies to their everyday life. Even with this practical but critically minded exercise, there is a reflective component. These reflective components often get combined with the critical. Some examples include asking students to find resources that would help in reviewing their purchase, then review the source. Some of these exercises involve group work during class, while other work involves a formal reflective component in the form of a minute or reflective paper in which students reflect on their work during the exercise. That is, how they approached the search exercise, how they thought about resources, what they would have done differently, etc. Librarians in all cases are thinking about ways to engage their students in unique ways, whatever the context. Most interestingly, implementing a critical and reflective component is nearly universally seen among the librarians interviewed as necessary to enhancing the information literacy classroom. It is also seen as a crucial component to defining information literacy. Critical and reflective practice is viewed as necessary to changing perceptions of the library and librarians. These perceptions are seen as enhancing the credibility of the librarians, also enhancing the perception of librarians as educators, as central to students' education. There was a logical connection between critical and reflective practice and creativity when librarians are asked specifically about ways in which they employ creativity in their teaching. In what ways do you employ creativity in your teaching? Can you give me an example? How could creativity, as you might define it, become a key component of student engagement? And how could creativity in the classroom, if at all, transform the library experience? And could or does it engage students in the research and learning process? Creativity, as the interviewees define it, is considered a key component to student engagement. Creativity is tied to activities and new things or processes in the class. The common theme among interviewees is that students tend to engage more if they do something they have never done before. The goal for many in the classroom is to do something fun and exciting and to get students to realize that information literacy is not all dry and boring. Fun is the operative word as it transforms students' relationship to the library and changes the conception of the library itself. Importantly, creativity can unlock student potential, reasoning that students are curious, interested, and motivated to do something and want to be excited about the lesson. One interviewee asked, how can I get them motivated and interested? And in turn, transition that energy into their creativity for their research project. Creativity, this interviewee suggests, transforms the library experience and transforms the reputation of the library. Another interviewee noted that the libraries need to build more collaborative spaces to encourage collaborative learning, a key component for defining creativity. The library, as one interview explained, is a stoic, quiet, serious academic place. The perspective is that the relationship between the student and the library is changing, and creativity is fueling the change. Librarians are breaking down mental blocks students have in thinking that research has to be hard. Finally, the framework is important foundation, but what else can be done to break down barriers and make information literacy instruction more engaging? There was consensus among interviewees in stating that making information literacy more engaging and creating information literacy strategies is crucial to making information literacy relevant. Librarians also need this to stay relevant. The common thread among respondents is that there will be a new revolution that is beyond the classroom. If the framework plays a more central role in facilitating creativity in information literacy instruction, it needs to be more fluid by addressing current needs in teaching and learning. And that is the Acrl framework that they're referring to. Finally, one of the other emergent points of note is that transformations in the classroom must be driven by a changing generation of student learners. A new generation of students will have new ways of thinking in order to meet them where they are. We have to use creativity to think of these new ways to do things. Early results indicate that the library and information science field uses interchangeable terms to define creative pedagogy. Because of a lack of central importance in the classroom, library information literacy instructors do not initially see themselves as educational practitioners. However, librarians see their importance in the information literacy classroom. Sometimes not consciously, the librarians interviewed are trying to do more in the classroom to change the perception for how students view their role, how students view the library, and as a way to both engage students and transform the way they learn. The information literacy librarians interviewed seem to doubt their knowledge and implementation of creative pedagogy. This lack of knowledge does not necessarily mean that creative pedagogy is not being applied in the classroom. Creative pedagogical practices are being implemented in the classroom, but they're not fully understood why or how. It is clear during the course of the study that however creative pedagogy is referred to, it is understood broadly to be necessary for changing the conversation in the information literacy classroom and for engaging more fully in both the information literacy classroom and higher education in supporting transformation of students. It is too early to say how those who identify as creative experts in the classroom will identify creative pedagogy. It is clear that creative pedagogy is happening in academic libraries by way of critical and reflective practice, through constructivist principles, and with the acknowledgement that larger forces are at work in developing an expectation among students for the way they learn, how they engage with material, and what they expect in practical terms for their future. Librarians are aware of this imminent change, but are searching for the help they need to better understand and to respond to these changes. The number of participants for phase 1 and parameters around theoretical sampling is dependent on saturation. As part of constructivist grounded research theory, the constant comparative method will be employed during the collection of data and will continue until the researcher has reached saturation. That is, no new categories have emerged. Saturation has not yet been determined as there are still more interviews to conduct and research material to review. Not included in the first phase of the study is the analysis of additional research material or artifacts from interview participants. Interviewees were asked to provide a copy of a lesson plan used in the planning of their information literacy class, preferably for a class they consider to be creative. For those who do not use lesson plans, participants were asked to provide 4 to 5 sentences reflecting on their approach to the class, how they make creative considerations, how they engage students, and any thinking about ways in which they might enhance instruction for the class. The lesson plans or reflective approach analysis is not examined in the context of this short paper. Thank you.